Hi, I'm Ben Masek, CTO of Sony Media Cloud Services. I'm very honored and privileged to be speaking at this virtual conference this afternoon. And much of what I'll be talking about is a subject that I am deeply passionate about. I'll be talking about enterprise media workflows and about how over time we will see more and more of these workflows becoming powered by cloud-enabled platforms. While there's been a lot of hype surrounding the term cloud for several years now, I truly believe that cloud actually is coming of age when it has to do with media workflows. If you think of these media workflows, one thing that's obvious is that they are very dependent on compute-intensive flows. They also are storage hogs. It turns out cloud is very good at dealing with both of these requirements. And in my mind, we are entering a golden age in enterprise architecture for media, one in which we can begin to think bigger and dream bigger in terms of how we plan to actually architect our media ecosystems of the future. Gilbert Chesterton, almost a century ago, was certainly ahead of his time as he penned his famous quote, "There are no rules of architecture for a castle in the clouds." I was fortunate to spend 9 out of my last 12 years working at Sony Pictures Entertainment in our digital media technologies group. And there our mission was to imagine, integrate, and implement a variety of media workflows to facilitate the many business units whose lifeblood revolved around media. About 4 years ago, I was that much more fortunate to have worked for Chris Cookson. He is one of the premier leaders, one of the true innovators and visionaries in the media technology space. And back then, he actually challenged us with trying to come up with better ways to manage media backbones for enterprises while leveraging cloud. And much of what so many of us were after in the studio space, on the broadcast side, and in many other media-centric type enterprises was to come up with this media ecosystem nirvana. One that would have this media workflow heaven that would connect all of these various types of media, all the many different media elements that also would be working and being exchanged, that would be created, that would be manipulated, that would be marketed, all in conjunction with a variety of IT and business entities. These would need to follow a variety of data security requirements, a variety of business rules. They would need to tie into the metadata systems. They would need to be able to track title ID, product ID throughout. These would need to also accommodate federated systems so that we could actually protect in a federated way how all of these flows and all of these workspaces of data could be contained and secured. This ultimately would allow all the many participants in the enterprise media ecosystem to work more closely together, whether it was for production executives or cameramen or editors, visual effects artists, sound engineers, marketers, archivists, customers, all would be able to more seamlessly work together at scale. Of course, we're still on our way to achieving this cloud-based media ecosystem nirvana, and we are faced with a variety of media workflow challenges. And I'll just call out, in summary, 4 of the primary ones that we've been encountering and that we're working on. The first has to do with heterogeneity of media across the enterprise. Secondly, we'll talk about the growing complexity of media workflows and the growth in terms of the number of these media workflows. We'll talk about the more media and just this ever increasing in terms of the amount of media in our enterprises. And then finally, we'll discuss some of the technical shortcomings that we're working on overcoming. There is an incredible diversity, of course, of media types and formats across the enterprise. In terms of media formats, we're dealing with a variety of business documents. We're dealing with a variety of Word, PDF documents for things such as scripts. And then more importantly, we're dealing with a variety of rich media assets, audio files, images, videos. If you think of source daily files, some of these dailies actually are being encoded at the gigabit per second plus range. These same exact dailies, the same exact content, is then finding its way being transcoded automatically into much smaller files, streamed out at maybe the 100 kilobit per second range. We're talking about a 10,000-fold decrease in terms of the size of these files. At the same time, we're also having to manage a variety of very large files, 4K mezzanine files that might be in the 500 gigabyte range. We're working with 200 gigabyte digital cinema packages. We're working with advanced formats. We're working with J2K, XAVC, as well as more mundane formats such as H.264. And with all these complex and diverse media file types, we're also dealing with a high degree of complexity in terms of these media flows throughout the enterprise. A few years back, while I was working at a studio, we actually did an assessment of all of the many different types of media flows throughout the enterprise, and also looked at how they were tying in to the many business processes. And what we found was literally hundreds of different media workflows, all working in conjunction, once again, with a variety of these IT and business type systems, once again, requiring that these media flows tie into a variety of business rules. There certainly is much more media in our overall space on the M&E industry side. Actually, over the last decade or so, fairly consistently, what I've seen working in studio environments, as well as broadcasters and others, is about a 2 to 3-fold increase year over year as far as the amount of video being managed and consumed. The primary drivers are mostly creative as well as business-oriented. On the creative side, I think we're all familiar with the advent of 4K, and now more and more, many folks are beginning to push even for 8K. We're looking at better image quality. We're looking at more use of high dynamic range. On the business side, we're dealing with much more content. We are actually right now working with many new markets. As far as this growing demand goes, much of what we've been experiencing on the media and entertainment side actually has many analogs. If we look at the creative production, marketing, distribution, or even monetization side of things, it turns out these 4 pillars that we have on the M&E side of things also exist as far as other verticals that have, once again, many of these same problems. If you look at government entities, at the DoD, for instance, they are literally moving exabytes of video information. On the medical side, there is much more imaging being captured and utilized throughout. On the educational side, as we begin to see more online universities and more online courses, that much more video is being created and consumed. And the same goes for manufacturing and retail. Of course, so many of the problems that we are encountering stem from just how we're organized within larger enterprises, where many of the activities happen in silo. If you look at the creative process, for instance, really what you end up finding still to this day are a variety of islands where specific activities and functions are actually being performed. And what is required for this media workflow powered enterprise of the future to work better, you will need better exchanges of the media from one silo to the next. And much of this truly is beginning to happen in a more seamless way. Most of these transfers now are happening through digital means. The days of sneakernet are near over, fortunately. But what is making these transfers more complex nowadays is that they, more often than not, will also need to tie in to a variety of other business, IT, and data security type entities. They'll need to tie into, once again, the product ID, the title ID, the metadata. They'll need to also follow some of these single sign-on and other access control rules. They'll need to also understand how to infer from analytics and provide all of the financial reporting that might be needed. They'll need to be able to also follow some of the rights windowing and rights management type of windows throughout the life cycle of this media. And finally, in terms of technical shortcomings, much of what we've been saddled with over the last decade plus mostly stems from two types of issues. I'd say during the earlier days, a lot of what we would face in terms of how we would architect media systems had to do with single purpose built systems. These were single stacks where you'd have a repository with content attached with some database to track that content. You'd have your application server maybe to stream it and process the content, and then you'd have a web server to interact with the customers. And in the single purpose built stack, you actually could achieve and usually meet the initial requirements of the end customers. But where this began to fail is in the ability, or in this case, inability, to easily exchange content from one system to the next. If you think of the example of maybe a marketing trailer type system, within that system, it may work perfectly well for all the various creatives and maybe some of the distribution folks to be able to go in and review and approve localized trailers, maybe comment on them, add metadata. But the shortcoming and the failure really came when you actually needed to transfer all that information from that one system to a distribution system, which in itself was completely siloed. And most of the transfers really were happening mostly through manual type means. The same would occur with the B2B portals, as well as dozens of other systems that exist in these larger enterprises. The second types of challenges that we would see from an architecture perspective mostly stem from the next phase of evolution. And the next phase of evolution is certainly a great step in the right direction, where mostly we have a better, slightly more centralized view of where the content might be. This doesn't mean necessarily a central physical repository, but more importantly, a central view of where the assets are. And many larger IT enterprises or IT-supported enterprises actually have been moving in this direction for quite some time, where you're leveraging things such as enterprise service buses to exchange information, mostly IT and business information, from one group to the next. Now, of course, where this falls short is that most of these traditional IT-type systems are ill-equipped to handle professional format media type of files. Once again, the DCPs, the 4K MES files, the XAVC files are not going to be well understood by these IT or pure IT systems. These same systems are not going to know how to actually move around 500 gigabyte files at will. And so where we believe much of this is evolving towards is this concept of evolved integrated media workflows. And in this diagram right here, on the right side, we have all the traditional IT and other business systems that, of course, are able to share all of their type of data and all their services with all the many business processes that rely on them. And what, of course, is different about this diagram is that it is very important that these same systems also interoperate with the media systems that once again understand the professional formats that we need to deal with in a lot of these larger enterprise media studio type environments. From an architecture perspective, on the right side, you're seeing a fairly modern IT stack that is being seen in most large enterprises nowadays. So, of course, you have, from a hosting perspective, cloud or even on-prem or possibly even hybrid hosted systems, very common. You have this orange layer of API services that allow for all of the different business applications to actually be properly serviced. On the left side, you have a very similar stack with two key differences. At the bottom, from an infrastructure perspective, we, of course, are actually wanting to promote the use of cloud-based infrastructure. And this, once again, is mostly to ensure that we can accommodate the scaling and elasticity needs that we know heavy media workflows ultimately rely on. At the orange layer, we also have some differences, and this is where we have media-centric services. And once again, these are just different by nature from most traditional IT service API layers. And in our case, you'll find things such as digital asset management services, transport services, processing services, and the like. If we do just a slightly deeper dive in the advanced media platform architecture, what we'll actually find is that at the bottom, once again, we are relying on infrastructure services as well as certain platform services from public cloud providers. In our case, you're seeing more of the terminology that references some of the Amazon Web Services, though the same could actually be found with Azure Media Services, as well as some of the Google and many other providers. The most important part in this diagram, in our mind, has to do with this green layer right here, and this is our API and worker layer. And once again, what you're finding in this layer are a variety of media-centric services that, once again, you're just not going to find in your traditional IT stack. Some of these, once again, have to do with the authorization, the analytics, and then more importantly, digital asset management services. You'll have your event and notification services, your transfer services to tie into UDP-based transfer solutions such as Aspera, as well as maybe even multi-part HTTP transfer type services. And then probably the most tactical set of services from a media perspective have to do with content processing. Jeff Melkin actually did a great job just talking through all the different types of transcoding needs. In our case, we're really just trying to package in the queuing, inspecting, protecting, and transcoding needs of all the different types of content that flow through our overall systems. And so with all this, we are finally getting closer to being at a stage where media platforms hosted in cloud environments are truly finally finding their way into real enterprise media workflows. And I'll just flow through a few examples here of how this is actually being used right now in production environments. The very first is actually one of my favorite workflows because it was actually one of the very first large-scale workflows that we actually implemented. This has been in production for a little over a year right now, and it is fairly simple in terms of what it's trying to do on the surface. It's literally just trying to help save the studio some storage costs. We're moving files from more expensive NAS-grade storage and trying to move them into cloud-based cold storage. But what's special about this is the way, first off, that we're tying in to, once again, some of these IT and business entities shown in green right here. We're needing to follow some of the data security requirements. We're needing to make sure that we maintain and manage the metadata throughout this cycle, for instance. And what's great about this workflow is that we're actually dealing in the petabytes of information that is being moved from one set of systems to another. We're moving literally hundreds of thousands of files, some in the sub-megabyte file size range, some all the way into the 500 gigabyte per file size range. All this is being done at very high throughput in a high availability type environment. My next favorite workflow is one of our broadcast workflows, and this is one that we've very recently rolled out and one that I believe will begin taking place with many networks and broadcasters in the nation and around the world. In this case, what we're doing is we're actually sourcing the content directly through satellite feeds. As this content is coming in, it is being stored centrally, partially in a cloud-based environment, and allowing people to actually run manual QC checks on the content. And then there's an automated mechanism to allow for the scheduled delivery to all the many stations that this broadcaster is working with. And once again, what is somewhat interesting about this workflow is that we are tying in to a variety of business systems. Probably the more interesting one in this case is we're tying into the automated scheduler system. Once again, this really speaks to the importance of combining the media-centric systems with all the other IT and business type systems, as much as possible, doing so in as automated a way as possible. In terms of the last example here, this is something we've talked about quite a bit of over the years, and it's something that we used to talk about more in futuristic terms. For instance, this ability to go straight from camera lens into a cloud and begin working off the content. And now we're actually beginning to do this in true production type environments. Sony actually has several cameras now that are equipped to allow, through wireless adapters, this ability to stream directly from the lens, ultimately finding the content's way into our cloud environment. And the big idea here is that many productions in the future literally should mostly consist of just a simple lens that is really just a capture device, blasting all that information directly into the cloud. And one specific reason for doing that is to allow for some of the downstream operations to actually happen more quickly, more seamlessly, to allow, for instance, editors who want to potentially start working in the cloud. A lot of this has to do with the concept of content gravity, where we're trying to suck in all this content in the cloud, and once we have it there, we want to leave it there. We want to allow the creatives to begin working off that same content in a cloud-based environment. Partially what they get in terms of benefits is this ability to tap into this elastic compute, this ability to very quickly scale out as much compute might be needed to render out some highly complex scenes, potentially in seconds or minutes. So with all this said, it is certainly my very strong belief that the future of cloud media-based platforms is not only here now, but is and will be here in the future in a much grander scale. I truly believe we are at a point where we can begin to think bigger, to dream bigger, to begin looking at things such as CapEx savings. Jeff, once again, I think did a pretty good job on that, talking about the advantages of shifting from CapEx models to OpEx models. This ability to actually shift to a pay-as-you-go type model where you're really just paying for the services that you're utilizing. They're only paying for the amount of storage or the amount of compute that you might be utilizing along the way. You're also taking advantage of this ability that cloud really promotes of allowing for better collaboration from anywhere in the world. You're, of course, benefiting from the elasticity of the compute, this ability to have high availability architected systems through more redundant architected type of solutions. You're able to leverage best of breed enhanced security infrastructure, which when coupled with properly designed and securely thought through software solutions can provide a very, very good option. You're, of course, dealing with scalable storage. You're able to utilize some very high density, very high speed SSDs, or you can also use some very low cost cold storage options. Finally, for all of this to make sense, you need to have a properly thought out, well-designed API so that it can integrate with all the other IT and business solutions. And with all this, it is certainly my view that many of the next-gen media workflows that we will work on will be better thought out because we have better tools, better capabilities, mostly leveraging cloud that we'll be able to utilize. And because of this, I know for a fact that there will be no more rules of architecture for a media enterprise castle in the clouds. Thank you.
Questions?
Okay, I got a couple, but let me start with the work. So just the last point that you made about APIs. So with all of these, maybe like your archiving example is a good one, or any of the workflows, you had to inherently interact with a lot of systems of record that are already in place at a major studio. And so is the strategy in that case, when you do these implementations, are you replacing in many cases those systems of record? Are you using your API to connect to them and maintain those as systems of record, or do you cache everything that was in that system of record into your own repository? What kind of strategy do you tend to see more often?
And so, no, excellent question. And in the examples that we've been working with, we actually place a little bit more of the onus on the enterprise that we're working with, which is usually where their technologists want it to be. In their cases, they absolutely want to have full control over, the title ID, product ID, whatever system of record they may have. And really what they're doing in our case is they're simply leveraging some of the media-specific APIs that we have. So in the archive case that I was mentioning, Mostly what they're doing is they're actually just launching a file transfer through an Aspera connected service that is hosted on AWS. We have an ingest workflow then that will kick in. Along with the transfer of the media file, we'll also get some base metadata or product ID type information. So that'll allow us to tie in and have a record of what the enterprise is needing to track to. And so at a later time, the enterprise, of course, will be able to track what the status is of that archive file, and we'll be able to retrieve that file if need be.
I have one more, but I don't want to hog it. Okay, so then the next question is a little different one. This is about the cloud itself, and this last example that you were giving about basically direct from lens to cloud capture. Have you or any of your clients had any success in ROIs or comparisons of, because now you're exchanging bandwidth and storage costs for obviously that still had to be present on premise, but what sort of information is there to suggest that we're reaching a point where that can actually be cost effective too?
Sure, and another great question. I think we're still in the very early stages of that. We're not quite yet moving 8K or 4K real-time feeds just yet. And of course, one of the bigger limitations in those workflows really is network connectivity costs. So what we're beginning to see in the early examples of how we're doing this is mostly proxy streams that are just being blasted through so that some of the downstream decision makers, creatives can begin some of their work. And in certain cases as well, you can follow that up still with some of the source content that eventually will slowly find its way and catch up to the proxy files. In terms of ROI calculations, I don't know of any specific studies on that just yet. I would presume that in certain cases, just this ability of even getting the proxies over to the creatives more quickly, if you think of news or sport type of scenarios, some of that probably could show some benefit from an ROI perspective.
Any other questions up there?
This is less technical. You have creatives logging into your system. How do they feel about how are the creatives reacting to this advanced new cloud-based workflow?
Yep, another great question, and I think to some extent, the more advanced creatives, I think have been waiting for this type of solution for quite some time. They more and more on the pure commercial grade side of things are seeing systems that have some incredible capabilities, but they've never, in most cases, been able to interact with enterprise grade media professional solutions, ones that once again can handle their more complex codecs or whatnot. So I'd say in general we're actually getting incredibly good feedback, a lot of encouragement. If anything, we know we have our work cut out because we continue to get many new requests for many new features. So in general, what we're seeing is just a very strong flow of new users wanting to utilize it. And the great thing about it is from a viral effects perspective, we're seeing more and more users downstream wanting to do the same.
You had talked about switching from an expensive form of storage to up to a petabyte to cloud. Do you have any cost estimates of what the more expensive stuff was costing you per gig?
We do. I don't have any off top of mind, but I would certainly assume that we're certainly talking probably beyond 10 cents per gigabyte range. In some cases, it may be less. A lot of it really just depends on what kind of scale you're working with is a starting point.
Excellent. Anyone else? Nope. Okay. Thank you so much, Ben.
All right. Thank you.